So my name is Lynn Jeffrey, and I am the director of IFTF Foresight Essentials, which is the part of the Institute where we teach people how to develop their own foresight practice and how to think like futurists. And we're here today for a talk, a kind of behind the scenes chat with Swedish entrepreneur and VC, deep tech VC, Niklas Bergman. And I'm going to jump into it. I'm going to give you a quick update on a few things happening around the Institute, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mike Leopold and Niklas. So in case you didn't know, we do have lots of different ways to learn futures thinking and foresight. And this is one of the things that we do is we offer these monthly webinars where we're learning from masters. And we also teach classes for individuals. We have classes on Coursera, self-paced and self-guided. And we have lots of trainings that we do for organizations inside large and small organizations. These are our upcoming trainings in case you're interested. We do have one starting tomorrow, which we're really excited about, the first one of the year. And we're going to be collectively exploring the future of climate migration. So in case you're interested in any of these, please do check in with us. We also have tons of other resources. We have these Foresight Talks webinars. The next one we have coming up will be from a couple of design futurists from Mexico City and the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you're interested in that kind of topic, please look out for that one. We have futures buddy matches where we've already matched up over 75 pairs of people from around the world who want to talk to someone about the future of X. We have monthly meetups for folks who are alumni of our courses, and we have a really great monthly newsletter, which if you're interested in this topic, how to do more of this, how to do it better, you might be interested in. Just a quick reminder, make sure you selected everyone for the chat. Please do ask questions in the Q&A and the chat because we will be taking questions. We'll have a nice Q&A section at the end of this. And we'll be taking all your questions and filtering and trying to get to as many as we can. So thanks for that. I am really excited to welcome back Niklas, as I said, a Swedish entrepreneur, venture capitalist. He's been building companies for more than 30 years all over the world in different kinds of environments. And for the last couple of years has also been an advisor to the European Innovation Council Fund, which is a 4 billion euro VC fund, which invests in more than 100 European startups every year. And he will be hosted, he's going to be sharing his latest TechStorm taxonomy with us for 2022 and talking about how he's built it the way that he has and why. And he will be hosted and interviewed by my colleague, Mike Leopold, an IFTF Distinguished Fellow, longtime technology researcher, senior researcher at IFTF and Silicon Valley with a deep history in a lot of large Silicon Valley tech firms. So I am going to turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Welcome, everybody. Hello, Niklas. Hello, Sweden.
Hi,
Niklas. I'm really delighted to have you join us today. And as a technology researcher myself, I'm really excited to hear your views about how you investigate technologies and how you think about technologies applying to everything else in the future. So, you've been involved with IFTF before at some of our workshops. So I'm just going to hand it over to you and let you go ahead and share your views about tech storms and technology taxonomies and take it away.
Mike, thank you. And give me a second, I'll just share the screen here, right? Oh, screen sharing disabled by host. So this is like the standard operating procedure now. I can't share. Can I see my screen? Am I on mute?
We will get that. Aicha will get that fixed. I hope. Aicha?
Easy for me to say also that now it works. Yes. So just give me one sec.
No worries. It's the way of the world. There we go. We can see it.
Yes, like that. And then to like this. And, is it working now?
We see your Twitter handle.
Yes, and the IFTF logo, right?
Yep, we're good.
Cool. Okay. Hello, everyone. And just I've said this to Mike and Lynn and the team that I'm a bit nervous about this. Is something I've been working on for quite a while. And the reason my hidden agenda today is to get some honest feedback on it. So comment away and ask questions. And to help this, I shared a PDF of my latest sort of what I call the forecast, although we should not do forecasts because that's overrated. We can discuss where we're heading, but actual forecasts are difficult. But it's shared in the chat, and there's also a link to the occasional newsletters that I send out around these things. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, even good night. I saw someone from KL, I think, so that should be good night there. So happy for you guys to join us. We're 99. I don't know if we can reach 100 today, but welcome everyone, to say the least. So I'm Nicholas Bergman. I live with my family, wife, 3 kids, dog outside of Stockholm in Sweden. And just to be brutally honest, this is beautiful, but Stockholm is more like this actually right now. My background is that I've always loved technology, science, wanted to become a physicist once. I read and watch and listen to all the sci-fi you can see and hear. And my wife complains that I'm an early adopter, which is probably quite true. And maybe not flying from Japan to San Francisco in April of 2010, like this lady did just to get the first iPad, but still, I enjoy these things. I'm essentially very curious about where we're heading and what how we approach new innovations, new technologies, and everything around that. I've spent the last 20 years working with technology investments and technology in the sense of more science-based, research-based innovations, things coming out of university labs, or I really, really love to go deep down into the technology, try to understand it, interpret it, so I can explain it to other investors and the market and try to find a good market fit to those products and those innovations. Challenging as it is, having done this for more than 20 years now, definitely what someone said, a collector of tech bubbles, whether it's the dot-com bubble, the nanotech bubble, we've had a clean tech bubble, mobile bubble, and AI and everything, which is sort of part of the scheme. That's where we are. But I find it interesting that it goes up and down before we see long-term effects of these innovations. And I do this as an investor through my own company, pre-seed, seed stage, but then as was said also as one of the advisors to the European Innovation Council Fund, where we did last year 150 investments in Europe, aiming for a bit less this year, but definitely above 100. So very, very interesting times we're living in. Really, really cool to see that we have a new focus on what people today call deep tech. Everything that is more hardcore, if we call it that, not just applications and mobile apps, but definitely more technology intense companies that are actually working on more on the basics and trying to solve some of the huge challenges we are facing here. And when it comes to technology, for me, whether if it's me as an investor or as an entrepreneur, or as I sometimes advise companies about new technologies, I find quite often that people are just looking the other way. They try to ignore it as long as possible. They don't want to be part of it. They don't want to complicate their strategies or their plans, meaning that they just try to avoid it as much as possible. For me, that is definitely the wrong way to do it. I think we should all embrace technology, try to understand what's happening out there, try to get a sense of how we're doing this. And this is challenging. And over the years, I've seen quite a few ways of trying to show this. And just to give you a few examples, from the bit complicated ones to the simplified ones, to the ones that are maybe more narrow that I'm looking at. This one, for example, where it's very much IT focused. Of course, different versions of this. This one from Matthias Koller is really, really beautiful when you dive into different emerging technologies and trying to see how they connect. And it's also one from the UK, which is great and inspired me a lot when it comes to how you structure it. And the best one, of course, the QT number 100. We can talk about this one. So it's a bit of sort of tongue in cheek there, which I always appreciate. So for me, what is it now? 5 years ago, I started out by trying to map the technologies that I find relevant at the time, doing this on a quarterly basis. Some stumbling attempts of doing this and developing it further and further. And as you can see, I have a big challenge in staying on one graphic profile, if we call it that. I usually tend to change that all over there and all over. But what is it now? A bit more than a year ago, I really felt the need to try to avoid mixing apples and oranges, try to find a structure that could work for a bit more than a quarter, actually. A structure that's based in science and how people look at technology in economics and in innovation, in policy and society, and try to build from that. So taking a few of the existing frameworks that's been around for quite some time. We'll look at the technology waves, the Kondratiev waves that we've seen, everything from the steam engine to information technology, Carlota Perez on the cycles of technology, different ways of that. There's a lot of information. I'm not going to go through it, just as examples of where I found my inspiration, so to speak. And then taking this one level up or down, depending on how we look at it, there are, from history, 26 general purpose technologies, everything from the wheel to steam combustion engines, it's the internet and it's artificial intelligence, etc. Those general purpose technologies that are used in many different functions, in many different application areas. And through that, I came down to 11 technology sectors after having read through a vast amount of different research reports and how to categorize sectors, whether it's in research or in trade or all these nomenclature that was available. Coming down to these 11 areas where I started to see some kind of structure that could be used. And out of that, for the past couple of years, I've come down to 116 enabling technologies that I follow. Not all of them on a daily basis, of course, but still trying to keep up with these and use this structure as some kind of sorting mechanism for myself. And this is on page 3. If you have downloaded the PDF that I shared, you can do that afterwards if you want. From this, and for me, working with investments and as an entrepreneur, I really do try to make sense of it, to simplify and simplify and simplify. So with that, I took the 42 ones of these 116 that made most sense and fuel the most discussions, actually, and put them on a grid. That on the x-axis, of course, is the time scale, and on the y is a general sense of strategic relevance for companies today. And for me, this is a good tool. And here is the case that we can always now spend the next 10 hours to discuss why is that one to the right of that one, and isn't that one more important than that one? And I'll be happy to discuss that at another session, but This is my snapshot of where we are today, from my perspective as an early stage investor then. But this, for me, gives a whole lot of good starting points for discussions with other investors, with companies, with management teams, with boards of companies, even with politicians sometimes, if we get them to listen to this. And then as a more of a fun thing, I do a top 10 list every quarter on the 10 FOMO technologies that everyone in my field is talking about right now. And of course, it's genetics, AI, blockchain, it's extended reality, AR, VR, now with Facebook and the metaverse and Apple's presumed AR goggles and Magic Leap and Microsoft doing that, of course. But this top 10 list is just the rumors, the discussions, very subjective from my side, not very scientific, but it just as a fun conversation starter when I meet with people. And then looking forward, if we go back to the technology waves, I mean, we're in the 5th wave where it's maturing. IT has been around for 50 years now, and it's definitely something else coming. There's all these bets out. I think that we might be seeing something around what I've sometimes called the bang technologies, which in this case is bits, atoms, neurons, and genes, miniaturization, bits as in IT, of course, atoms as in the physical world, new materials, robotics, whatever it is, neurons, neurotechnology, our understanding of the human brain, genes, genetic engineering, cloning, GMO, whatever it is around that, the pharmaceutical industry and that. And whether it's miniaturization or anything else, but we're definitely on the verge of the next wave. And working with this for myself and trying to understand this, for me, it's a 3-way process. Whether it's a new technology trend or any general trend, I try to analyze and understand what's happening, try to get a sense of the timing perspective. Then the second part of this is to assess the implications for an organization, for example, the competitive situation, how that is changing based on this new innovation, for example, the customers, how the company will evolve and change. And then, of course, after you've analyzed and assessed how this will affect you, you need to adapt. You need to change your organizational structure, your leadership, how you deal with uncertainty, ethical, sustainable perspectives on this. And this I do with books and some material that I have. Try to constantly update this, of course, because it's a moving target. Also some digital tools around this just to finish off with that. So with this, my idea was not to talk that more about this. And thank you for your attention. And I see that we've reached a bit more than 100 people, and that's really, really fun to see, 110. So with that, maybe stop sharing the screen and over to you, Mike. And thank you for your attention, everyone.
Wow. Thank you, Nicholas. That's really an amazing array of tools and collections and analysis of advanced technology. I have a kind of a pair of questions that kind of fit together. You have gone through IFTF's one of our Foresight Essentials of training programs, and clearly you are deeply engaged in the future in many, many, many ways. So I have kind of a dual question, is that how does future thinking and inform your technical analysis of the array of technologies? And then the second part of the question is that now that you have a buffet of technologies, how does that shape your own view of the future?
I'll just start with that one, with the second one. I'm very curious about things. I'm curious and a bit skeptical, as I think you should be. You should not necessarily buy everything that scientists or politicians or business people or futurists are telling you. You should definitely form your own opinion to a certain extent. But of course, working with what I work, you have to be optimistic in a sense. I'm very optimistic about where we're heading. There's all these challenges when the midst of or at the end of a pandemic. We got an environmental crisis and all that. But in general, I'm quite optimistic. And I see that when looking at new innovations, looking at technologies, looking at all these people working on new things. Quite a few people around the world today actually actively, more than a couple of years ago, are actively working on trying to solve the bigger issues the challenges that we are facing. And that makes me very optimistic. So that's one way of using technology for me to form my view of the world. Then I can get very, meeting with politicians, for example, I can get quite scared when they don't really understand these, to paraphrase a legend, these inevitable surprises. I mean, there are quite a few things that we see happening. We will live longer, for example, and that will not come as a surprise, meaning that we will have a challenge with the retirement system, the pensions. Society as a whole will have to reevaluate how we see our lifelong careers, marriage till death do us apart, etc. I mean, all these things. So that's sort of an extension of your second question. The first one, I think, what's really fascinates me is trying to see the weak signals. With IFTF, I've been able to gather tools and learn tools on how to actually see the weak signals, collect those, structure them, and then also sort of from my layperson perspective still be able to see some kind of scenarios in this. And those using some of these tools have been really, really helpful. So taking the tools from IFTF that are more general and apply them and sometimes tweak them a bit so that they fit into my more technology-centered perspective, for good and for bad.
Great. I was going to ask you about the thinking and analytic process that goes into these taxonomies. Just really briefly, do you create Twitter lists? Do you have particular experts you follow? Or you use any kind of data mining? It looks to me like you put a lot of values and weights on these things. Can you talk a little bit about your research process and kind of gathering and analyzing these technologies?
Yeah, for me, it's given what I do, I spend a lot of time talking to people, listening, reading, searching for information, going down the rabbit holes of a specific technology area, of course. I use Twitter quite a lot, where I try to curate special verticals where I follow people and institutions and magazines and writers. So that's one thing. I have a different of test runs, nothing I can elaborate on right now, but where I'm trying to automate this, trying to do a whole lot of more of data mining. I use a few of these tools, but I would like to do it even more. So any suggestions on that from anyone here today would be really good. It's, for me, it's also a question of time. It's challenging because I would have to spend a whole lot of time to get that started for it to completely take over from the perspective that and the tools that I use today. So it is a bit of a challenge to get over that threshold, actually. But there's something I'm working on to be more data mining, use more of data mining in that.
And then I guess it sounds to me like you've got a cohort of pretty smart people as well. Your network of just friends and community. So can you talk
especially outside of the VC world, right? There's a whole lot of people outside of that one.
Can you talk a little bit about just curating information networks as a researcher?
Well, yeah, I don't think people that I meet fully understand how much information I try to get out of them. Not necessarily as sort of a corporate espionage or VC espionage, but just being very curious about what people do. If it's, I mean, last year I did, through the EIC fund, I did 3 quantum computing investments. And I've been looking into quantum computing for the past 15 years. And the researchers have always said, no, wait and see, come back in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. And now we're sort of there when there's all this money being poured into that field. And for me to be able to visit these companies, look at the clean rooms, to actually touch and feel and see up close the actual machines that they are building, I mean, that adds tremendously to my understanding of that, of course. So that's a luxury to actually be able to meet all these people. But I think one thing you should not forget about this is what you can see in other areas, what you can see in culture when it comes to science fiction, documentaries, in the arts. It can be in poetry, it can be in video art, with new media art that I'm really fascinated about, and actually looking outside of these very, very specific technology areas, looking outside, talk to people that have a very different perspective of what you do. I think that's equally valuable for me to try to understand what's happening in my field. For example, a couple of years ago, there was CERN, this particle accelerator outside of Geneva, where they had internships for artists, or scholarships for artists coming to CERN, to this physics research center, to actually do art based on the what they see happening at this research facility. So mixing and matching, cross-pollinating between disciplines, can be disciplines in technology, but also with disciplines outside of technology. I think that's really, really fascinating. And I've had some great insights from people that have nothing to do with what I do, actually. And that's always fun.
Great. Boy, you know, the questions are starting to pour in. I've got a few more questions I want to ask you, but we'll open it up in a few minutes for lots of audience participation here, Nicholas.
Of course.
So I've got a question that, and I see that other people are asking it too. And when I looked at your chart using strategic urgency and strategic relevance as axes, and so my thinking is, wow, boy, the relevance and urgency are really variable and context dependent. Like if I am an entrepreneur starting a new company, I probably have a focus. So can you talk a little bit? I mean, you mentioned you experiment with these modules, these lenses a lot. How can you adopt this kind of urgency relevance matrix for very, very specific variable use cases and strategies?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's interesting. What I share quarterly and what's in this matrix, and it's actually at the start of the Q&A or start of the chat, there's a link to download that. I saw there was some questions about that. So you can scroll up to the beginning of the chat to download the PDF. And that urgency importance matrix, the one that I share quarterly is a very general one. But from time to time, I do workshops with management teams or boards or large cohorts of a company. And in those workshops, we can actually go deep down into these different technologies and do a matrix that is very company specific. And of course, it differs if you're an IT company, or if you're in forestry or in pharmaceuticals. Of course, it's very different what you come up with and how you prioritize. That's one thing. And it's also different. I mean, if you look at this and have a 12-month perspective, it will definitely look in one way. And if you have a 10 or 20-year perspective, which is sometimes really fun to have a longer perspective, then of course it looks different. I think that quite a few of these technologies are very relevant in a 20-year perspective, but as a corporate executive, I don't think you need to think that much about fusion or cloning today if you have a 12-month perspective, of course. So both when it comes to different industries, but also the time perspective means that the structure and how these things pan out, that of course differs quite a lot in between sessions. But that's something that I do from time to time with the management teams of small and large companies.
Great. Yeah. So yeah, I can see that how it could be used contextually. So as a technology researcher, I have similar ways of preparing technology palettes, but I tend to think of combinations of technologies. And I noticed in one of your blog articles, you talked about cross influences as being very, very important. So I wanted to ask you, maybe not in these matrices, but how do you think about things like supply chains, about developer ecosystems, about behavior graphs, about complex things that just can't be represented in a two-dimensional array, ecologies of markets, and ecologies of technologies. An iPhone, it's a screen, it's a processor, it's a radio, it's a graphic display, it's a hub for services, it's a combination of a lot of things. So I want to ask you, how do you factor in cross connections in your modeling as you're doing strategic analysis?
Yeah, I mean, as one thing I said earlier is to get inspired from people in other fields. I think that's one way of seeing cross-pollination. I mean, there's also with multidisciplinarity, people today that have a philosophy degree and a physics degree. You have a business background and you have a technology background, for example. I find that really, really interesting, and I think for many people that's a right way to go. What's fascinating there is that if you look at previous technology shifts, when the steam engine, that era was maturing and we started seeing electricity, for example, or when we started getting into the combustion engine and Ford's mass production. In those shifts, we actually, even going back in history, 100 to 200 years, we can see that the people thriving are the ones that are able to be inspired from multiple different sources, different fields. And I think that's what we're seeing now, that you have people, you look at teams in a new way, you look at organizations in a new way, where you actually make the technology people in the company more business minded and the business people in the company more technology minded, for example, meaning that people with a mix of disciplines, a mix of backgrounds, both when it comes to experiences, education, where they come from, gender, everything. I think it's very clear that the more mixed we are, the better it gets, actually. But I can also see that, I mean, I agree, there is a challenge with the two-dimensionality of what I propose here, or any other ways of, I mean, the classic industry value chain, for example, that is turning more and more into ecosystems where you actually work together with your competition to form new alliances, to solve challenges for your customers, et cetera, and that was unheard of just a decade or two ago. I mean, one example now is that some of the large truck manufacturers in Europe are pooling resources, starting a company together to build a truck electrical charging infrastructure through Europe. That's just one example that I don't think would happen. And I mean, it's not only that you standardize it, you actually build the infrastructure together in a joint venture. And that is one example of a new reality that we are seeing. And I don't have a clear answer to how to approach that, but it is very interesting, I must say. So I totally agree with that.
Great. Great. It's fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of ways to view the future, and you're certainly getting a lot of depth to a lot of the important nodes of the future, which is really, really helpful. Boy, we've got a lot of questions from a very active group here. I'm going to ask you.
Good.
I'm gonna ask you a question, and I'm just gonna and while you're talking, I'm gonna let you speak to the audience, and I'm gonna sit here and read some of these and try and find some of the hottest ones here because I've been listening intently. So my question is, there's at the Institute for the Future, we spend a lot of time talking to leading thinkers, inventors, artists, scientists, creators, activists. People who start initiatives and movements, and sometimes we fail to take into account the retarding forces or the dragging forces that take us backwards, and that are just as complicated as the positive futures. And and I noticed that I want to say first on the questions here, I'm not going to take a lot of questions about why did you leave this technology out of that one, but I wanted to ask you to just riff a little bit on how security and privacy engineering and the lack of cybersecurity are going to impact across the board, all 42 technology test sectors here. And let me then, I'm going to go offline here and look off screen instead of paying attention to what you're saying, but maybe the audience wants to hear a little bit about how you think about some of these negative forces as you're formulating kind of strategies and forecasts out of the positive forces.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely not the expert on cryptography or cybersecurity and that. What I do see is that there are people claiming to have solutions to that ongoing, for example, in AI and quantum computing. What I find is that both when it comes to privacy, security issue, we start with privacy, for example. I think it's, as with many other things that has to do with technology from a personal perspective, or maybe even from a corporate perspective, is that I mean, we have to decide. I don't mind sharing my personal information with a company or with a government if I get something in return. But I need to feel that I get something back, and I need to feel that I'm still in charge of that decision. So sharing information with a company to get something back from that, sharing my exercise schedule or what I exercise to get a tailored exercise regime, for example, happy to do that. Sharing a lot of information with the social network, I'm less inclined to do that because that would only create a tighter bubble around my my thinking, which I don't really appreciate. So I think that's one perspective. Now, other perspective here, more in general, is also all the ethical perspective around technology in all its different forms. I mean, having been involved with nanotechnology almost 20 years ago, it was really, really interesting to see how the nanotechnology industry was trying not to repeat the mistakes that was done in chemistry, for example, or in some of the biotechnology areas in the everything from the early start of the 20th century up to the late 20th century, actually. Meaning that being very, very resourceful and proactive in trying to understand and explain to people how we should make sure that this is not dangerous, etc. And I think also with the challenges in a more open society with the World Wide Web, I mean, there's all these security leaks and all these challenges in actually containing the information and making sure that it's safe and sound. And I've had my fair share of being hijacked and through open Wi-Fi's in airport lounges around the world. And it's really, really painful. And then, I mean, from my perspective, I don't have that much sensitive information on my computer as a big company, whatever it is. But I think corporate espionage and governmental espionage, that's something that really, really triggers this. And not to mention the all these hacker groups that wants to get money out of this. So I mean, to be honest, there, Mike. I don't really have a good answer. I just see that it's something, as with many other technologies, that it has to be discussed. We have to understand it. We have to, whether it's privacy, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's ethical perspectives, we need to make sure that we decide how this should be used, how we should manage it, how we should keep ourselves safe and sound from that. I know that you've been going deep down in cybersecurity lately, so I appreciate any input and comments you have on that, actually.
Well, not to go into depth, I'm concerned at the kind of vulnerability that is impacting all of our systems, and it's just that the history of digital engineering didn't include enough security practices and engineering to control misuse of APIs. There's trillions of APIs and interfaces, digital interfaces, that are potentially vulnerable. But aside from that, it's just a factor that can in fact slow the adoption and the utilization of the other technologies. We can see it's accelerating. So separately, getting back to some of your own work, I've got a question here, and it's good. A question I like is, how do you mix your technological trends with risk analysis, crisis, lack of water, energy, migration, social disturbances, or do you advise the people to make those decisions? Talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah, I mean, my work with the EIC fund, I mean, that's and coming from the European Commission, the European Union, meaning that everything that we do has a great to good perspective, sustainability, great to good for society, etc. So that's a very good start. But meeting with politicians, for example, I always appreciate when they get in touch and I get the opportunity to discuss technology. Very eager to do that, at least I was. And then when I go to those meetings, try to get the discussion going, realize when I leave that they don't really get it. They're not, mostly not that interested, unfortunately. Meaning that I think from my perspective as an entrepreneur and investor, I can only do so much. Meaning that what I try to look at is, okay, is this a reasonable, good investment that we can do into a new kind of photovoltaics, for example, or by investing in this company, can we improve the productivity in a wind farm, et cetera, et cetera. I think, so that's one perspective, trying to be part of a positive change when it comes to doing investments. Another perspective is when I work with a company and looking at new technologies, looking at the technology spectrum that would be interesting for them, I think it has to be in a number of steps. I think you have to go down into this and dig quite deep, find the technologies that are relevant for this organization, for where they're heading, for their strategies, and adjust their strategies to include these new technologies that are emerging. Based on that, I think you need to get the sustainability perspective. You need to get the ethical perspective. Is this useful? Is this valuable? Is this relevant? Or is this just creating more trash or more plastic or whatever it is? So yes, I think it's very relevant. And I think it's, at least when we do these workshops or looking at these things as an investor with companies, I think it's interesting. I think the only way for us to do it is to start with this specific issue around what innovation areas are going to affect us. And then when you have a short list of those, take that further and actually discuss the impact that these will have. Make sure that the impact is positive, because I mean, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to energy, when it comes to water, of course, there are a whole lot of larger issues around that that's tough to include in a matrix like this or a top 10 list, of course. But in a grander discussion with a company or with politicians or in an organization, I always try to include those discussions. And where I quite often feel that I don't have enough experience or knowledge about this, for me, it's really important to include people that come from that background, scientists, environmental scientists, researchers, etc., that knows a lot more about these issues than I do, and to combine that with the perspectives that will help the companies to create.
Great, great. We've got some questions about technologies, not what you didn't include, but people are curious. What technologies are you most deeply personally fascinated in, but that you're convinced are going to have the broadest impact? I know you mentioned years in nanoengineering and bio-nano robotics or nano-bio robotics and all of that, though. Can you just kind of raise one or two of these kind of themes that you find personally fascinating and are convinced are going to have the most profound, widespread impact?
Well, maybe it's me being biased, but I definitely as I said in the beginning, way back, I wanted to become a physicist. It didn't happen. Started companies instead, went to business school, went deep down into technology anyway, but more as a layperson than an expert or a researcher. But I've had that love of physics for a long time. So maybe I'm biased, but I felt it more than 20 years ago when I started looking into nanotechnology. I definitely felt it when I worked with a couple of nanotechnology companies 10, 15, 20 years ago when I started working with a few of these companies. And I definitely see it now. Just one example, I invested in a company in 2006, and they are now probably going to get their first real customers this year. So it's more than 15 years in the making. So that's one perspective of deep tech, one perspective of nanotechnology, where it definitely takes time. So we were very much too early 10, 15, 20 years ago when we started looking into nanotechnology. I do think that nanotechnology is the hidden gem of technologies. Nanotechnology, material science, new materials it's happening now. It's all around us. If you look at a computer today compared to how you built the microprocessor 10, 20 years ago, it's completely different. In your smartphone, in your laptop, in your TV, it's very much nanotechnology that you have in there. And we don't really think about that. The materials that we use today in our gadgets, in our cars, in our clothes, there's a lot of material innovation that is there, but it's so hidden behind the applications. It's so deep down in the enabling technologies so that we don't really think about it. It's not really fashionable. It's hard to create a narrative that is interesting around that. But I really, really do think that what's happening in nanotechnology is one such thing. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask you, so that's one, you are clearly deeply fascinated, but is there something that kind of, you've got a top 10 genetic engineering, AI, but from an operational perspective and from a human perspective, what do you raise to the top as something that everyone should be paying attention to, and that for you it's kind of one of the largest, most important focuses, aside from your deep focus? Who would you say you've got to listen to this and pay attention to this?
If we take two perspectives on that, if you take a corporate perspective for companies, I think that what's happening now in AI and everything around extended reality, 5G, for example, I think these things, sort of the next generation IT, if we call it that, ICT, I think there's really some interesting low-hanging fruit for companies to see and to work with in these areas. There is and has been a large bubble in artificial intelligence, especially on the startup side. but we actually start seeing some interesting applications coming out of that. So that's on a corporate level, that's very much where I see that there's a lot of opportunities and things that you can use off the shelf more or less today and start implementing in your organizations. On a societal level, I think that everything around healthcare, biotechnology, genetics, which then includes what we've done during the pandemic with the vaccines, what we see happening in healthcare, e-health, digital health, remote health, remote surgery, for example. This is really interesting. But then also, if we, for example, look into synthetic biology, I mean, creating new organisms, these things I find really, really fascinating. And that's more on a societal level, unless you're a biotechnology company, of course. But that means that if we take what's happening in biotechnology, if we take what's happening in the energy sector and combine that with new kinds of material science and sprinkle a bit of AI on top of that, we will definitely see a completely different world in the next couple of decades. And that's fascinating. And then going back to one of the earlier questions, I mean, the drawbacks, the challenges, the not so rosy pictures of the future, I think we're in for a hell of a ride here, in a good sense. But the way there, it's going to be challenging. We're going to see a digital divide. We're going to see that technologies are being expensive, not available to everyone in society. Not in Sweden, for example, in the Swedish society, but we'll also see that over the world. Some regions, some countries are, of course, more prepared to prosper from these new innovations. So that technology divide is also going to create tension and a challenge. But for sure, when I talk to politicians, society is definitely not ready for these new innovations. And that is a challenge, and that is something we need to cope with. Sorry, long story there.
No, it's all fitting together. It's a mosaic of the futures, and this is really exciting. We've got time for a few more questions here. So what do you think about meme economies? And by meme economies, I mean people running away and talking about human augmentation and calling it metaverse now. And we're seeing a whole range of uses and abuses of the blockchain called Web3 and trading of tulip bulbs. So how do you advise your clients on these kind of meme economies that come and go based on social movements, and ultimately looking past the memes and looking what remains? How will regulators deal with the actual core truths and changes that are going to be coming with these things? Extended reality and blockchain coding of objects and so forth.
Yeah. No, I think it's very fascinating. I have a friend that keeps reminding me that he got his first Bitcoins already almost 10 years ago or something, and that's very impressive. And there's some great foresight in that, of course. But I think the jury is still out there. The whole blockchain, NFT, decentralized organization, DAOs, and that is fascinating, and I think there will be interesting things coming out of that. I think the jury is still out there. Definitely, it's still very early. There's going to be booms and busts and bubbles bursting before we get to some sense of reality in that. And if we continue that into talk about the metaverse and extended reality in that, of course, seeing the first Matrix movie in 1999, Tron, other of these old sci-fi movies, Second Life, that was a big hit. What is it now, 15 years ago, way too early. I mean, we've been dipping our toes and getting into that, and you have Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, all these things that's been happening for the last couple of years. I think it will be an addition to what we do today. I don't think it will fully take over. It will not be Ready Player One, or it will be in these environments 24/7. But as an addition, I think it's very, very interesting. Still very much early days. I mean, I think quite a few of us here tonight have been going through a vast amount of VR headsets, collecting dust now to a certain extent in the shelves. I don't see any in the shelves behind you, Mike, but probably in the drawer somewhere. I mean, that's how it is.
Actually,
that's a challenge. Yeah, that's a challenge of being an early adopter, probably. But I can also see, having my kids as trend spotters, I see that they ask for these things now, the VR headsets that I have, and they actually start using them again after 6, 12, 18 months. So something is definitely happening there. I think we as I mean, I always try to summarize these discussions like this is to be curious and a bit skeptical. Be curious about these things, try to understand how they can affect you, but don't feel that you need to jump on everything. Don't need that as an individual or as a company. Don't feel that you need to start projects around these areas immediately everywhere. Be curious, listen in, meet with some people, discuss it, and then form your own opinion and some kind of pathway to trying to understand that. And then, of course, in a regular perspective, I mean, I think it's fine that the lawmakers and the politicians are a bit behind, because if you have a technology that's going back and forth like this, up and down, hype, no hype, bubbles bursting, it's difficult for lawmakers to make sense of that in the beginning. So to be a bit cautious, to be a bit wary about this, and when it starts to settle, when you start to see where this is going, then of course you need to have some legal perspectives of it. But then, of course, I mean, it's also a learning experience. You have, I mean, with there's been some wonderful stories about NFTs. People think that they actually buy the actual product, but they actually buy a copy of it for tremendous amounts of money, and that's just, I think that's a steep learning curve for some people on that, definitely. Although I would love to be on the receiving end, selling some of my new media art with some NFT on that, no problem. But that can be a totally different challenge, right?
Great way to wrap it up. Thank you, Nicholas. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lynn Jeffrey. Thank you. Thanks again, Nicholas. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much. Please do visit Nicholas's Substack. Thank you so much for sharing your taxonomy with us. And one of the things that I'm left with in this conversation that you've talked about several times is the challenge of talking about this and communicating and having sort of facilitating really strategic, honest, future-facing conversations with policymakers and lawmakers and politicians. And I'm just struck by, the gap there really between the deep work and analysis that you're doing and the everyday challenges of being a lawmaker and a politician. And just, I wonder, I'm going to be thinking about that one for a while. We're in the US used to seeing, tech company executives show up at Congress and testify. And it is quite obvious that many of the lawmakers really have no idea what's going on. And so you do start to wonder, at what point do things really get out of hand because we simply don't have the regulatory structures to manage them. But you did say, what gave me hope was that it's probably good in some ways that, that there's a lag, because you wouldn't want them to be regulating things that are too emergent.
No. Absolutely.
Anyway, yeah. Really good food for thought. Yeah,
just one comment on that. I think I always, when politicians from time to time invite me, I always, as I said, I always get, oh great, they want to hear about this. And then sometimes we realize afterwards that they just wanted to tick that box. So say, we've listened into technology, we looked at technology, and then they just continue in their the trajectory they had before. And I think, I say we have elections coming up in Sweden this year. I can more or less only speak for Sweden, but I think that what I see is that there's a lack of vision. Of course, we've been going through a pandemic that's been challenging, but we've had a booming economy for more than 10 years.
That's right.
And I would have loved to see a lot more vision in politics and in society than we've had in the last couple of years. Because as I said, I think there's some inevitable surprises, things that we that look into this know will happen. We will live longer, for example. That's just one thing. And that will affect us in many different ways. And I really, really would like to see some vision around that, not extending. I mean, in Sweden, there's a discussion around extending the pension age.
Right.
1 year, 2 year.
Right.
I mean, that's not a discussion we should have. It would be difficult for politicians to propose it. But I think that give it a generation or so, we're going to extend the pension age. We're going to need to extend it like 10, 20 years.
Right.
I don't know, 50 years. What is it?
Right.
Depending on who you talk to. It was this American company that just got $3 billion in funding for longevity research. And if they succeed, and they have succeeded in lab studies, meaning that we might live twice as long as we do today. And some people say 5,000 years, what I know, but meaning that, sorry?
Certainly will be a geoethnic asymmetry to that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Meaning Sterling wrote a book about it, the famous science fiction writer, one you might want to read, called Holy Fire, where there was a gerontocracy of very, very, very wealthy old people who controlled the longevity technologies. And
okay, on that note, I'm going to have to bring this to an end, but we're just getting, I know there's so much to say, so much interesting stuff. Nicholas, thank you so much for sharing, just scratching the surface with us. And please do reach out to Nicholas for more information. I want to just remind folks what's coming up. Next week, we will have a great talk with Christian Canibe from Mexico City, a design futurist, and Nick Weidinger, based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then in March, we will be having a talk with our two colleagues about Jane McGonigal has a new book coming out about how to be fearless in realizing a world with possibilities and imagining the unimaginable. So please do check us out for that. And if you're interested in an organizational membership and partnership with IFTF, IFTF Vantage is the way to go if you have an organization and you'd like to do more of this and engage more with research and IFTF researchers. And that is it for today. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Be in touch.